Hi, my name is Brigitte O'Sullivan and welcome to Module 5 of the LCDC Communications Training. In this module today, we're going to be covering around plain English communication. In this module, we're going to be covering 5 key topics. We're going to look at why plain English matters for inclusion and trust. We're going to look to see where simple and clear language is important. We're going to review common jargon that's used internally within the LCDC and also how we can avoid that. We'll review how we can structure communications for clarity and also review some accessibility guidelines in terms of literacy, being disability friendly, and also around translation. So to kick things off today, we're going to look and see why plain language builds inclusion, understanding, and trust. So clear language ensures that everybody can understand regardless of their literacy levels, regardless of their background, or indeed their language proficiency. What's really important to note is that plain language and the use of plain language and plain English certainly does not mean you're dumbing down your content. You're really ensuring that you're delivering the best quality content that you know is going to resonate most with that audience that you are targeting, ensuring, as we said earlier, that it can be understood, that people trust what they're reading, and that it's a very inclusive piece of content. It removes barriers that exclude people from participating fully in community programs or decisions. Equally, plain language allows for accountability and openness. People can see how and why decisions are being made. Stakeholders are more likely to engage when communication feels accessible and respectful. And equally, it allows for less confusion. It means fewer follow-up queries, fewer delays, and less misinterpretations. When language is clear, as we know, engagement improves. Community members understand grant guidelines, leading to more applications and fewer errors. How often have you received an application for perhaps a grant funding and realized as you were going through it that not everything was answered correctly, or indeed that those applicants didn't meet the minimum criteria? In that instance, we could assess it and say, well, perhaps the guidelines weren't easily understood and they weren't fit for the audience in which we were targeting. Public consultation. It is so important with public consultations that we get to engage with as broad an audience as possible, not just those that are familiar with policy language. It's great when we put the effort into running these public consultations with the objective of meeting with as many of the public as possible, that we are sure that we are engaging with those audiences in the largest way. It's meaningful engagement, and that people feel that they're not restricted perhaps from attending these because they don't feel that it's inclusive. Meeting notes or reports in plain English can help all partners to stay aligned and act faster also. And clear information builds trust in LCDCs and strengthens their reputation for openness and fairness. As we say here, if people don't understand us, they can't take part. Plain language should guide every part of your LCDC communication, every touch point, from a public announcement to an internal meeting. It's an opportunity for you to strengthen inclusion and understanding. So as you can see here from the infographic on the right, areas and touch points and part of your day-to-day role within the LCDC, where you can actually ensure that you are maximizing the opportunity for your content to land in the correct way, for people to feel included, for people to feel that they are valued, and that people not to feel that they don't understand what's going on. And so often we can see this through, internal meetings, but equally external meetings and those more public facing, through presentations and briefings, through announcements and launches, when you're creating content to roll out on your social media platforms, on your website, or indeed, like we said earlier, about grant applications and guidelines. And finally, when you're crafting those terms and conditions, and being mindful and respectful, obviously, of the fact that we are tied to certain legislation, we are tied to certain methodologies within the world of LCDCs and local authorities and government funding. And that's really, really important too. But it's equally just to recognize the audiences whom we are targeting with this piece of information and making sure that we are crafting it and we're framing it in a way that gives us the best chance for those cohorts to understand and fully be briefed what the objective is. So when it comes to meetings and presentations, I suppose internally within the world of LCDCs, local authorities, and various departments and stakeholders, there can be a lot of familiarity around certain jargons and acronyms, for example, LECP and SICAP. But not everybody understands those. Not everybody who comes to the table or receives a piece of communication from you is fully literate around these terms. So we'd always say, avoid using those. Don't make the assumption that everybody knows that. Use short sentences and everyday words to describe situations. Secondly, summarize key points at the end of each agenda item. Again, don't assume everybody is entirely up to speed with what was covered perhaps at a meeting or at a presentation. It's nice to pause, reflect what was spoken about, and kind of go over the key points and invite those who wish to make comment or to seek clarity before you move on to a new agenda item. Ask yourself, would somebody new to the LCDC understand this? And confirming their understanding before moving to the next steps can be very, very beneficial in this. When it comes then to writing reports, studies, and information that you want to share with the public, always be mindful of the audience that you're targeting. As we say here, write for your audience, not for your peers. Use an active voice. So for example, the LCDC supports rather than support is provided by. It's a much more inclusive, active manner in which to craft your content. Present information in short paragraphs with headings and bullet points. We can get quite daunted if we see a couple of pages quite text heavy. And as I suppose the brain processes language, as we process text on paper or on screen, it's much easier for us to do that when we see the text is broken up with headings, subheadings, short paragraphs, or bullet points. It allows us to digest the information far more quickly, far more effectively, and we stay engaged with that content longer. We recognise, of course, that within the world of LCDCs and local authorities and government departments and various stakeholders, there can be a lot of terms that you are familiar with, but those perhaps that who you are communicating with won't be as familiar. We would always recommend when you are writing a report perhaps or a study that use maybe the first kind of page or two, or indeed have an appendix towards the back where you can define terms on first use. So instead of saying LCDC, you can give it its full title. Instead of saying SICAP, you can explain what that is. Define it in first use, and then you can go on to use that more kind of shorter kind of jargon word or that shorter acronym for something as well. Or indeed, as I say, a glossary can be really, really useful in that respect as well. Always use plain, bilingual titles where possible, being reflective of both the Irish and the English language in terms of your reporting. So a nice demonstration here of how we could replace jargon with some plain English alternatives. So firstly, commence project implementation, a very, very habitual word, used within the world of LCDCs and the rest. However, if you are kind of presenting that externally, perhaps there wouldn't be the same familiarity and understanding around it. So a nice alternative to that would be maybe start the project. Submit documentation for review. A nice alternative is send your forms for checking. As you say, it's not dumbing it down. It's just making sure that the majority and the maximum number of people understand what you are doing, what you're saying, and what you're asking for. In terms then of your online, your social media, and indeed grant guidelines, keep your digital copy concise. Keep one idea per paragraph. Don't try and put all those key points into the first paragraph. Take your time. We'll kind of go through in a moment just about how to properly craft that top down, kind of from the main headings all the way down maybe to other information as well. It's a good tool for you to consider. So as I say here, use headings, use lists, and indeed a visual can be great for readability. A nice infographic can be incredibly useful in terms of sharing information or key points as well. Ensure plain English terms in grant applications, in your guidelines, and in your terms and conditions. Small changes to this can make a huge difference. Like we said at the beginning of the session, it can kind of, I suppose, speed up the application process. It can, I suppose, there'll be less queries on perhaps grants or on application forms as well. So freeing up staff to answer more immediate queries as well. So little things can make a huge difference. Provide Irish translation and accessibility compliance. We'll come to this in a moment. Accessibility is mandated and hugely important in terms of having inclusive communications as well. Look to your text size, look to your color contrasts, and also your screen reader compatibility. And we'll come to those in a few moments and give you some guidelines around that. Most importantly, avoid unnecessary formalities. Remember who you're talking to. Social media platforms can tend to be a little less formal than perhaps a report that will be sitting on one of your web pages on your website. So, it gives you an opportunity perhaps to talk in the first person, to be in a much more friendly, direct language. And that really gives you the opportunity to build trust with your target audience also. Like we're saying, jargon creates distance. Plain words, that's what creates connection. Many terms we use every day within the LCDCs and local government are not widely understood outside of those settings. Replacing jargon with plain, familiar language helps people to understand and engage confidently. It's such a shame when we see so much work going into some really, really good campaigns, creating really good campaign assets, really purposeful campaigns around sharing funding, sharing, kind of supports to different communities and all the rest. But if they're not written in the right way, if they're not presented to the right people on the right platforms, so much of that really good work that is being done tends to fall flat. It doesn't allow people, you're not targeting the right audience, you're not presenting it in the right way, and you're not using language that they will understand. A little tip for you, always use the language when you're doing a public-facing campaign, use the language that your target audience uses to describe you. And that way, you know that it will be clearly understood. So an example here of some, I suppose, of the common LCDC and local government jargon with some really nice alternatives as well. So perhaps something simple, target cohorts. So to somebody outside of your world, they would look at that and they may not truly understand what you mean by that. However, replace that phrase with a nice plain English alternative of groups of people we want to reach. As you can see, so much easier to understand. Outputs and outcomes doesn't necessarily mean a lot to people outside of your world. Those in the public, in the community, voluntary sector, those who you're targeting with the supports that you're offering, phrase it in a way, what we do and what changes as a result. Strategic objective, main goal, local indicators, ways to measure progress. So hopefully this is kind of giving you a little bit of an idea of how you can reframe some of your phrases, some of the jargon, and some of the content that you're currently going out with to make sure it's delivered in plain English, easy to understand manner. I suppose we use this jargon because it becomes familiar to us. Internally, you're looking to your internal customer and stakeholders, and that's the language that is just so natural to you, and that's fine in an internal sense. However, as professional as it sounds within your own world, it actually creates barriers for people outside of that world who you are also trying to engage with. It excludes community voices when your language feels overly official. Yes, we're not asking you to dumb things down. Yes, we're not saying to not kind of, stick to your values as the LCDC and stick to your values as a local authority and make sure it's really aligned to government policy. That is absolutely hugely important. But going back to the previous slide, there's ways to reframe things to make sure that you are really, I suppose, including community voices, that you're minimizing any misunderstanding or disengagement. Because when people switch off, they just won't follow you. They won't continue to engage with you. And as we say here, the clearer the language, the stronger the participation. And that's ultimately the goal. You're doing so much amazing work in connecting with the community and voluntary sector throughout your counties. You're great at telling the story of all of that, but let's make sure that it's really doing a great job for you and that you're increasing participation within your communities and increasing those wonderful initiatives that are currently supporting everybody within your county. So in terms, I suppose, of how to avoid the jargon, we can easily lean into it because it is so familiar, So read it aloud And if it doesn't sound natural, simplify it. If you think that sounds just a little bit too official, or it sounds like an internal document, and you're designing a front-facing campaign, or you're designing content or a flyer or information to send out into the public arena, and it just sounds a little bit too jargonistic, just pause, simplify it, rewrite it with plain English. Replace the internal shorthand with short, descriptive phrases that will allow people to fully understand things. A great tip is to test materials with somebody outside of your own immediate team before you publish. So perhaps there's somebody within your kind of your network at work that can just have oversight on something for you. Equally, you can do the same for them in another, instance, where they can kind of have a quick look at it, they'll overview it, and they'll say, yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, I actually understand what you're saying there. And it sounds like, it's really kind of well written in terms of that public facing content. Absolutely keep one key message per paragraph or slide. Like I said earlier, don't try and push everything into 2 or 3 sentences. Take time to really kind of, explain it well, add a little bit more detail, and add a little more detail. If we're overwhelmed with too much in one paragraph, people just, with that overwhelm, they just don't engage. They don't remember it, and they don't kind of take action around the call to action that you have built into that as well. And then finally, like we're saying, build a shared plain English glossary for your LCDC. Something that you can kind of use with all of your content, something that you can put into reports, something that you can have sitting perhaps on your website. It's a nice little infographic, maybe to share out in terms of your social media. If it's going to be going out maybe with grant applications, all of those types of things. It's a really, really useful tool and helps to break down those barriers around language. So spoke earlier there about how to structure a really effective communications. So it is all about communicating for clarity. Once it's got a good structure, information is very easy to understand. People know what they're supposed to do with it, and they act on it. That's called our call to action. They take action from it. A clear structure helps your audience to find what they need quickly, and most importantly, remember it later. It's not just about what you say. So like I say, it's not about packing it all into just one paragraph. It's actually how you organize it, how you lay it out, where you place the different pieces of content to allow people to digest it. And as we said, remember it and take action. So the top-down approach is what we would recommend for you here. Start with the most important message and point first. So you can see the inverted triangle. So we start with the main message at the top. What is this about? Lead with your key message or takeaway and follow it up then with the supporting facts and examples, and then end it with details or background information. So 3 clear steps. As you remember, use short paragraphs, use clear headings, and bullet points for easy scanning. That's the key to clear communication. So instead of starting with the background or the process, say upfront, for example, the LCDC is launching a new funding program to support community well-being. Then you can go on and you can explain the eligibility, you can explain the application dates, and you can explain the call to action or the contact details where people can find out more. The benefit of this is that within the main message, you're being very, very clear about what you're offering and to whom. So perhaps there is a community or voluntary group that is in need or is, keeping an eye out for different funding that's going to be opening up. In this instance, you're saying you're particularly launching it to support community well-being. So if they're in that particular area, they will know, absolutely, that's for me, going to find out more. What are the key facts? What do I need to know about eligibility? When does it need to be in for? And how do I find out more? Who do I send it to? But equally, if I'm somebody that is looking for a funding opportunity, but I don't align to community well-being, I know, well, in this instance, it's not for me. I'm not going to waste my time making an application. I'm not going to waste my time contacting the staff in my local LCDC to find out more, because I have been told in the main message that this is specifically aligns to community well-being. Okay, so it's just about getting the first message right and then layering in the facts and then finishing off with the detail and the call to action. When you do that, it allows for clarity, it allows for people to easily digest it, and for them to recognize, is this for me or is it not? If it's for me, what do I do next? And I can find out because it's detailed in this 3-step process. Literacy-friendly communication is really, I suppose, where we're writing to be understood and it's not for formality. We really want to recognize that there are so many different, I suppose, needs in our community, be that language, be that learning difference, be that there could be some visual or some audio kind of challenges that somebody may have as well. It's really, really important to remember all of these things when we are creating and crafting good content. So we see here some of the key practices that we will say. Use everyday language and short sentences. As we said, remember, what is the language? What are the words? How would your target audience describe you and what you do? And start to include those types of phrases within the content that you were creating and within those short sentences. Avoid abbreviations, and if it's something that you feel, well, it's something that is very important to us, it's very, very important we include it, perhaps do the descriptor, like we were saying earlier, in its first use, or indeed have that glossary of terms where somebody can reference and they can find out a little bit more perhaps in an appendix. Keep one main idea per paragraph or slide. Don't overburden with too much content. Keep it simple, simple amount of information. As we said earlier, the main idea, then the details, then how to find out more. Okay. Use examples, use visuals, and use stories to explain key points. That's where people engage. Somebody sees themselves in an example. Somebody sees themselves in another story and they say, oh, they're just like us. That looks like something I would align with. That looks like something that's going to solve the problem that we have here. Okay, it's a great way to explain key points. And provide printed and digital versions where possible. So remembering, and we'll come to it in just a moment, who's my target audience? When I understand who my target audience is, I understand their communication preferences. And I will understand, okay, are they somebody that listens to the radio? Are they somebody that is only ever on social media? Are they somebody who would really value getting a brochure into their hand? Okay, so that's it in simple terms, but understanding how do they like to communicate? What is it that we need to do for them to ensure that our message is getting to them? Okay, and to close this session, we say here, if your reader has to work to understand it, that's not plain English. And remember, it's not dumbing it down, it's making sure that it is being understood by those people to whom you are targeting. So accessibility is absolutely vital and is incumbent on all of us to make sure that all of our content is accessible. In terms then of kind of your websites, and if you're creating any web pages, you're refreshing your LCD pages, or indeed you're maybe uploading a newsletter and things like that to it, a great checklist for you here. Use a minimum of size 12 to size 14 body text and use a really nice clear font, perhaps like the ones we've suggested here, Arial, Verdana, Calibri, something like that. Nothing over fancy, nothing where it's the words themselves or the fonts look very, very crowded, nicely spaced out, easy to read. Maintain a high color contrast. So you might like gray and white together as colors, but a very pale gray against a white background doesn't necessarily give a high color contrast. You want good dark text on a light background to allow people to clearly see what's on the page. Avoid blocks of all caps and italics too. It's just not friendly to the eyes. It's hard to read and it's hard kind of to digest that as well. Add alt text to all images. So this may be something new to you. Alt text is where we put a description. It's on the back end. Your IT teams would be very, very familiar with it. So you want to upload some images, perhaps to a newsletter, to your LCDC page, something like that. You want to do an alt text descriptor to that. So it explains what is in the picture. It tells the story of what is in the picture and gives it a title. So for somebody perhaps who is visually impaired, it allows them to be able to read, to get, for I suppose their reader to read the page for them and tell them what the picture includes. But equally, from an optimization point of view, it allows perhaps if somebody was searching online for a piece of content around maybe an initiative, perhaps your image might come up through that search term and be presented to them. So it's got a dual benefit for you there as well. If you're creating any PDFs or slides, make sure that they are screen reader compatible, okay? That they fit the page well, that nothing's missing, that they're very, very easy to read. And lastly, like we were saying earlier, use headings and break down one topic per paragraph, and also the use of bullet points, just to allow for navigation. Just it's how the eyes and brain and how we compute and how we kind of read and digest content. And it's a great way for you to make sure that your website, your web pages and everything are going to be as accessible and really doing a really good job for you in terms of telling the story of your LCDC. We really want to support inclusion as well through language and cultural awareness. So we want to provide Irish and English versions of all public materials. Be sure to use professional translation. So you will have access to a language officer and people fluent in Irish within your local authorities as well. Don't use automated tools. Give plenty of notice to your language officers for them to support you in that professional translation as well. Keep translated text concise. So you don't necessarily need to mirror the English structure exactly. But what I would say is if it was perhaps your target audience was those in Irish-speaking communities, really important that you would give the devil in the detail. You'd give plenty of detail and as much as you would within the English version to them as well, so that they are getting the content, getting all the level of content that they would need, that they're being delivered it in exactly the same way as those English-speaking communities as well. Use Irish language signage and captions in visual materials, really important. And really what we would say is when you are looking to get content, visual static, as I call it, static content, so photographs, you're looking to do videos, you're looking to have kind of imagery that would be a good representation of the LCDC, really important that that imagery would represent diversity, would represent gender balance, would represent different ages and different communities. Really important that it's, the LCDC serves all those communities so well. So it's really important that the imagery that you're using will also have that nod and be very, very reflective and show that diverse community where you live and who you are supporting. So a couple of quick wins for you in terms of that accessibility. As we said, use clear, large font. Remember, between size 12 and size 14 with a couple of recommendations on font there a few pages back. Add white space for readability, plenty of space around it. Don't clutter everything in one bunch. Just leave it kind of with a bit of space, allowing people just to kind of glance through at ease. Use bilingual, inclusive language. Provide audio and subtitle versions of video content, really important. And review every document with accessibility in mind before it's released. Again, it's nice perhaps just to go to somebody else, ask them, that sense check, like we were saying earlier, for them to review it for you and just to see that, everything is really written, crafted, created and presented with accessibility in mind, ensuring that you're offering that inclusive content as well. So thank you. That brings us to the end of Module 5 of the LCDC Communications Training. Thank you.